Good day, soldiers. This is Sergeant Ollie, reporting from the cultural front lines. You've tuned in to Poets at War, where art, theology, philosophy, and fun converge in the theater of ideas. As we do each mission, we commence with direct transmissions from our field officers embedded deep in enemy territory. Our intelligence for this mission consists of a single but crucial general's report from our Bard-in-Chief, Joshua David Lake, delivering strategic analysis on the mysterious islands of Mist and Riven. Following reconnaissance, all units will advance to our primary objective, Operation Burnt Marshwiggle, a sustained engagement in the treacherous waters of metaphysics and swampy philosophical terrain. Today's mission briefing comes courtesy of Ian Wilson, who will lead our assault on the artistic impact and legacy of Edgar Rice Burroughs. The front line awaits, soldiers. And now, reports from the front on Poets at War. This is another Poets at War General Report. And here's your General, Joshua David Ling.
Hey everybody, what's going on? It's your General, back with another General's Report. I know you just heard that from the announcers, but I wanted to say it again. I had a very interesting thing happen to me. Was it last week or the week before? I can't exactly remember, but it's one of those two. If you're listening to this way ahead of schedule, as far, or not ahead, but in the future, this is July 4th week. I decided to wear my Stars and Stripes shirt. The thing that happened was, I was looking into a game. Actually, a couple games, a game series, if you will, that my father played growing up. When I was growing up, not him, but when I was growing up, he would play this game and I'd see him play it on the computer. Some of you may be familiar with it. Some of you may have just seen the box or know that it's a thing in gaming over the years, but the more popular of the series is the original Myst. And the second game is Riven. So they are sort of these esoteric puzzle games. They're sort of interesting. And my father really kind of got into them because he was into progressive rock, and a lot of the locations in the game and the box art and all things of that nature really reminded him of a lot of progressive rock albums. If you look at things like The Ladder by Yes, their album cover for that, and some of the other various albums from Yes and Genesis and Led Zeppelin, those sorts of vibes and feels really spoke to my dad from a very early age and continued on through his life as he read Narnia and took us to see Lord of the Rings and all the other stuff that I've talked about many times before on the General's Report. What I remember from the games is that he would kind of explain these stories to me a little bit, but that they were he didn't go into detail. It was always very just like, this guy is that and that guy is that, and I'm trying to figure out this puzzle and blah blah blah. And a part of that is I was 7 and couldn't really comprehend all of the plot, but the other half of it was my dad never really practiced explaining stories, and so you probably experienced this before. It sort of balloons in your mind and you're not sure what details are important to tell and what are not, that sort of a thing. And so I remember him really liking the games. I remember him showing me various things that he thought were funny, particularly from Riven. He played Riven a lot. Riven was his favorite. He would constantly speak of Riven years to come as I grew up, talking about how much he loved Riven. I remember there was a bad guy, and he had a trap to catch frogs, and he actually ground up the frogs and smoked them. I remembered that, and I remembered there was this whale-like creature called a wark. It was a whale shark thingy. Not a whale shark, but a whale shark hybrid thingy that got angry when you called it too many times in this interesting situation where you could essentially like summon him, and he would kind of ram this underwater almost like a submarine, but it's stationary, and he would ram the glass and be upset with you for calling him when you didn't have food. There were various things like that that I remembered. He showed me some of the animals in the game, just these cool weird animals and stuff like that. And for years I kind of was like, I want to know more about this. And every time I would actually like look it up on Wikipedia or otherwise, I'd be like, none of this makes sense. There's far too much fluff and detail and lore in the way things are written down by everyone who plays these games, and that's not necessarily their fault. I mean, the important part of the game, in a very real sense, are puzzles, more so than the story. Well, not more so, but it's very much a game where you're exploring and finding things out and piecing together the story, rather than the story being slowly unfolded to you in a linear fashion over time. And so I decided that I was going to watch a blind Let's Play of Myst, which that one was edited and a little bit shorter, and then a full, actual, complete blind Let's Play of Riven, because that was my dad's. He liked that game more. I remember him playing both, but he loved Riven much more, and specifically told me that many times. So I wanted to dig into Riven for personal reasons, and I wanted to find what made the story so good, because I knew he loved the story, not just the puzzles. And I wanted to know what made it so good so that I could take from it what I can. I'm a storyteller. I'm interested in craft, right? So there's going to be some spoilers for the games when I talk about this. I'm going to talk about a lot of the story, but hopefully this is a thing where if you're not that into puzzle games, you can appreciate it and move forward. If not, you can move ahead to the next thing. If you're listening to Poets at War, you can move ahead to our main feature show. But here's the deal. Myst is a story where you are a stranger. It's just your self-insert character. Fall onto this island and start searching around trying to figure stuff out. As you research this island with all kinds of weird things on it, like spaceships and observatories and dentist chairs, you eventually find out that there's a library where two men are sealed away in books. These books are other dimensions that were written by their father, Atris, who sealed them away because they were destroying his library. Or it seems, because both of them claim that the other one was destroying the library and that you should set them free. Their names are Cirrus and Akanar. Or Akatar. Is it Akatar or Akanar? Anyway, one of those two. I'll say Akanar and stick with that for now. So Cirrus and Akanar, they are the sons of this guy Atris, and you start to find a few notes from Atris in various places, and essentially you start giving them pages to their book that allows you to hear more of their story. It actually fixes some of the static that is in the book that keeps you from being able to see them and hear what they have to say. And eventually you kind of have to make a decision, this guy or that guy. However, they warn you that the last pages, there is amongst the last pages, blue and red, there is a book that is green, and you should not touch that book because it's a prison book just like the ones that they're trapped in. So you go and you talk to another guy who happens to be in the green book, who is Atris, and he is trapped, but he says, go get this page and then we can both cut out together. Come into this age and help me out, and we can get out together and seal my sons away because they are both evil. And you do so, save the day, and he mentions he might know a way to get you back to where you came from. That is Myst in a very quick nutshell. Interesting game, cool idea. It's sort of this steampunky sort of world, and it's a meta commentary on the idea that of basically these, what do you call them? These people, Atris and his sons, they write these books that they call ages. They're really worlds, but just work with me here. They call them ages. And these ages serve as levels in Myst that you go and you find the pages and you bring them back. It's sort of a meta commentary on the creation of other worlds for video games and for stories, and how we write these things. Also, there are descriptive books which actually hold all the data of this world, and then linking books which actually will take you into the world. And so it's sort of like hyperlinking, right? The web pulls up various data from the descriptive hard drives, the places, right? Whereas the linking books are the things that actually take you into the place. So that's a thing that needs to be mentioned. Also, if you go into one of these prison books and there's someone else in it, it kicks that person out. So those are just some interesting mechanics that we need to know going forward. The only way you would know about the prison book thing is if you ended up in a prison book without a way out, with one of the bad endings in Myst, right? Because it has bad endings. It's not just one ending. It has some bad alternate endings where you lose, essentially. So, with that being said, we move on to Riven. Now, Riven begins with Atris basically giving you a journal with some stories and stuff, and that's the other thing about this book. Not books, these stories. They have books that take 45 minutes to read. It's really crazy, like the level of research you have to go through. He says that his father, Gen is the name of the father, has taken his wife Catherine hostage on this place called Riven, where he is trapped. It is not a normal prison book, but he has no actual way off of this island. It's actually 5 islands. They're breaking apart because the world is slowly collapsing into a thing called the Starfisher. Basically, think like a black hole that's part of the world, right? And so Gen is seeking to keep Catherine and figure out a way back to Atris, either for revenge or for ultimately reconciliation, one way or the other. We don't really know, but Atris seems to think Gen is evil and wants Catherine back. He gives us a prison book to trap Gen, and he wants, and he says, you need to find a way to signal me when you and Catherine need to come home, because we can't risk sending a linking book with you to Riven. Otherwise, Gen will undoubtedly figure a way to use it and get out, because he's very smart. So, basically, Catherine, he believes Catherine will know a way to signal us once she is saved. A lot of beginning stuff. Basically, on this island, there are people who are the vassals of Gen, who worship him and believe that he is some all-powerful being over their world, when he himself actually is not as good as Atris, and even has some weird heresies in the way of the art of writing these books, and doesn't really understand why he can't just create another linking book back to Atris's world. So essentially, you go through all these puzzles, you try and figure things out, you see this world for what it is, you find out that there's this rebel group that is on a separate age called Tay. And Tay is this interesting space. If you've ever seen the cover for the game Riven, that is actually Tay, not Riven. But they are trying to find a way to exit everyone off of Riven and save everyone in Riven. They're working to save the people of Riven. And Catherine became sort of this savior character to them, even though she thinks it's kind of repulsive. So basically, you wander around the island, you figure stuff out. There's a lot of really, really hard esoteric puzzles that require a lot of outside-the-box thinking. It is incredible, some of the levels of mechanical interest that this game offers, and the whole world is just steeped in this lore of this one godlike character who creates books only to burn them over and over and over again. It's very fascinating. because he can never quite make it work. And so basically, you eventually find Catherine. You find you have to find a way to get her out of the cage she's in. You come across Gen, and he takes the prison book from you, thinking that it's a linking book, and is about to go ahead and link into it, but he says, no, you first. And the only way forward is actually to go into the prison book, call his bluff, and then have him come in and kick you out automatically, because Atris wrote the book that way. So very, very fascinating way to trap the bad guy. You trap the bad guy, you get Catherine, you go, and she says the only way that we're going to be able to signal Atris, because Atris is currently writing the Book of Riven, trying to repair all the damage of the world collapsing into this starfisher. The only way that we're going to be able to signal Atris is if we collapse the starfisher. If we manually collapse the starfisher so that Riven is destroyed. And so she works on getting everybody to Tay with the rebels, and then comes to you and has you signal Atris. And the crazy thing is, I'm going to pull this up as I'm doing it. The the amazing thing about this game, that, and the whole reason I'm talking about this, is the ending. The story's great, don't get me wrong. I was very blown away by it. I thought it was cool, it was interesting, but the ending absolutely broke me. So we're going to get to it. I'm going to read it in script form, transcript form. Atris links in to Riven and runs up to you. There isn't much time. Where's Catherine? Where's the book? I don't Atris! Calls Catherine. Catherine appears from around the corner. Atris turns and embraces her. Catherine hands Atris the prison book and walks up to you. The villagers are safe in the rebel age. I thank you. As do I. You've accomplished more than I could have hoped for. You've given me back my life. The path home is now clear for all of us. As a rumbling in the earth gets their attention, Atris pulls the linking book from his pack, opens it, and holds it out to Catherine. She puts her hand on his face for a brief moment and then links back to Dunny, which is their homeworld. Atris closes the book and turns back to you. This is where our paths must part. Perhaps we'll meet again someday. You know where to find me. Atris walks over to the fisher and opens the linking book again. He turns back to you, and it doesn't say this, but he kind of gives a wink. He says, "Goodbye, my friend." Atris links out, and the linking book falls into the fissure. Without warning, the ground beneath you collapses, and you begin to fall. Now here comes the really cool part. Atris says this, but it's a little bit weird. The reason he let you fall into the fissure is because the reason the Mist book, which is what links to the world of Mist, the first game, the reason it came to Earth is because it fell through the starfisher. So he thinks that it may take you back to your world, and it's your best chance of getting there. That's why he let you fall and didn't let you link out. Atris's voiceover starts to play as you're tumbling headlong into the starfisher, into this crazy cosmic space of stars, after you've taken this blind leap into the dark. He says, "Now I understand. Endings and beginnings are within the fissure. That riven cleft of stars that acts as both a wall and a bridge. And though I am unable to understand now, the very flow of stars that brought my Mist book into worthy hands, I am sure served as a safe passage home for my friend. The age of Riven is closed forever, but the people of Riven are free. And now I am at rest, understanding that in books and ages and life, the ending can never truly be written. And so, that is how Riven ends. And the concept of that last quote, in books, in ages, and in life, the ending can never truly be written. You know, the Bible says that eternity is put into the heart of man. And yes, eternity is put into our heart so that we will know him. But we forget sometimes that he is the infinite one. And in him are all good gifts. And as we move forward in this world, we're going to encounter so many weird esoteric puzzles and scream at the sky, what does this mean? What does this mean? And we're not going to have all the answers. And sometimes we have to take a blind leap of faith into the dark, knowing that he will save us. I know now why my dad loved this story. I hope you will too, regardless of whether you ever attempt to play these games or not. It's a wonderful story, and it rings incredibly true. I know I'm going to be taking a lot from this for a project that I'm working on within the world of courage. But you guys, really and truly, the ending can never truly be written. Love to talk more about this with you if you have a chance. You know where to find me, my website, joshuadavidling.com. There's a contact link up in the corner. Also, with the upcoming episode of Poets at War, Burnt Marshwiggle, Operation Burnt Marshwiggle, we had some audio issues with Brendan, but he is only 1/3 of the conversation, if that. And so it turned out a little bit weird. We didn't know at the time, and you know, you're going to have some issues, but I wanted to present it as it is because it was still a very good conversation and very well presented by Ian Wilson. So this is our discussion on Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Without Edgar Rice Burroughs, sci-fi as we know it does not exist. We don't have Star Wars, we don't have Star Trek, we don't have Battlestar Galactica, we don't have any of those things.
This is Burnt Marshwiggle, a long-form podcast about metaphysics and swampy stuff. So hike up your waders and let's get into this mess of art, theology, philosophy, and fun.
Rocks. I'm a burnt Marshwiggle, but my spirit's lit. Reality's a riddle, but I won't quit. Imagine or real, I choose what I feel. Noni in my heart, that's the realest deal.
Craig has been
Melodies trying to
invoked.
melt my mind, but I'm designed to find the
And headphones are on. Do what?
Invoke the Craig.
We have invoked the Craig. All right. I also love how British people say Craig. They say Craig. Craig. it's hilarious.
I play in the Scots Irish.
There you go. All right. So, I don't think I need to do any further intros other than awesome writer, cool guy. Ian, you got the seat. You can jump into it when you want. You can beat around the bush as much as you want. You can sing YMCA karaoke style if you want. I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't if I were you.
I would not do that to my worst enemy.
I would totally subject you to my worst enemy.
Oh boy. I actually last night while I was doing dishes, I was blasting Meatloaf and I was trying to keep up with For Crying Out Loud, and that song takes a lot of effort, man.
It does.
It is extremely difficult.
My version of that for hard to keep up with is 1 Week by Bare Naked Ladies. It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Anyway.
I haven't listened to that one in a really long time.
There's
Anyway.
a
So tonight's topic is, I kind of want to do a series on this, really, talking about the old pulp writers of the 1920s and 30s and what made them great, what maybe they could have done better, I don't know that I want to necessarily go over each one individually, but tonight I wanted to talk about the godfather of pulp, Edgar Rice Burroughs.
The man.
Applause,
myth.
applause.
Yes, he was, in my opinion, one of the greatest, at least one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century. Why I think so is because not just of his style and his quality, but also of his wide-ranging influence. Without Edgar Rice Burroughs, sci-fi as we know it does not exist. We don't have Star Wars, we don't have Star Trek, we don't have Battlestar Galactica, we don't have any of those things. We don't have we definitely don't have Dune. You know, really, really important guy in the history of literature. And of course, you know, Tarzan of the Apes has been an incredibly influential figure in culture. I mean, hundreds of movies have been made about Tarzan of the Apes.
Yep, they even have a whole town, which I'm sure you're going to get to. But his books basically paved the way. Books and movies ended up paving the way to make a whole town. Tarzana, California, right?
Yeah, Tarzana, California. It used to be his ranch. He bought that with money that he made from his movie contracts.
Yep.
They made a ton of Tarzan movies, and he made a boatload of money off of them and bought a ranch in California. And then Los Angeles starts encroaching more and more on ranch country. And he's basically surrounded after a while, and he decides to just sell off bits and pieces of his ranch, and it became a town. And the name of the ranch was Tarzana, and the residents just voted to keep the name. And so Tarzana, California is still a real place. You can go there.
Why you go to California?
Why would you?
I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I would, but
Stop taking in my brain.
Yes, sir.
So anyway, let me open my little thingy here so that I can
be careful with that.
What?
I just said be careful with that. Your little thingy.
Bruh. Edgar Rice Burroughs was born in Chicago, Illinois on September 1st, 1875. And basically, he was one of these guys that wanted adventure. And he joined the military.
So he was a man.
Yes.
Well, yeah. he was a man. He was a man's man. And he got kicked out of like 9 different schools, both public and private. And he ended up going to a military school, which he called a polite reform school. As the guy he could not stay out of trouble. Period. And I think that you see that reflected in like Tarzan of the Apes, where he's unintentionally getting himself in trouble, you know, because he was raised by apes. When he goes into civilized Western society, he doesn't know exactly how to behave. So he keeps getting himself in trouble on accident. And you kind of see this in Edgar Rice Burroughs' early life, is he keeps getting into trouble by accident. He tried to go to West Point, didn't work. He didn't pass the test, but he joined the military anyway. And he asked for the most difficult post that they had available. He ended up in, let me see, Fort Grant in the Arizona desert. And his job was to chase Apaches.
Well, there you go.
This was back in the day when a lot of fighting was still done on horseback. So, he was kind of a cowboy, which I think is really cool. Because a lot of these guys, you're like, they wrote about it, but did they actually live it? No, he was actually a kind of a cowboy. And he did write.
I think that does show in the way he wrote, for sure. He even though he wrote pulpy stuff, his descriptions of action were anything but pulpy. They were very detailed and very there were things that you could tell were pulled directly from his life and his experiences, particularly with like weapons and mechanical functions of war, those sorts of things. He definitely had a very firsthand experience with that comes through in his writing.
And that's why I love his writing style, is because his descriptions of combat are so vivid and they're very visceral. Because, it's one thing to say he stabbed the enemy with a sword. It's another thing to talk about what it felt like to stab someone with a sword, what it feels like to get stabbed with a sword, what it feels like to be in a violent confrontation. Because that's a different feeling, man. And I've only had it like in karate class, where it's in kind of a controlled environment. I mean, we're sparring, we're kickboxing, so anything can happen, but it's still kind of controlled. And there's no feeling like it, man. I'm not gonna lie. So anyway, he was one of those guys that tried everything. He did a lot of he had a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. He couldn't really hold down a job, and this is where me and Edgar Rice Burroughs overlap. Is I have kind of a hard time holding down a job for more than a few months, and he had that problem for a lot of his adult life, and he was basically broke, and he would write these stories for his wife, just to entertain her and distract himself from the stress of trying to find work with 2 kids, no less. And then he sold his first story to a magazine, and they bought it, and he made a little bit of money, and that was like light switch went off, and he sold them another story. They rejected it. The editor said, rewrite it and send it in again, and they accepted it. Then finally, he writes his first novel, Tarzan of the Apes, and that was the thing that got him the most publicity. He was rejected by a whole bunch of different publishers until this one magazine said, okay, yeah, we'll give it a shot. It proved to be extremely popular, and it made him a lot of money. He wrote, I don't even know how many more Tarzan novels. Just boatloads of Tarzan novels. He also wrote John Carter of Mars. John Carter of Mars is, in my opinion, one of the most important fictional characters of all time. Now, you probably don't know who he is. John Carter was...
I do.
Of course
I
you
do.
Well, Joshua, who is John Carter of Mars?
Sure. John Carter of Mars is a really cool Confederate cowboy guy who essentially gets thrown out of military service after the North beats the South and goes a wandering in the desert, finds his way to Mars.
That's exactly what happened.
It's a big jump in logic, but that beautiful jump in logic shows a man looking for a home after the only home he's ever known is destroyed. And it really shows a lot of amazing stuff. I've talked about it before, but the main thing, I think you're right, John Carter of Mars is extremely important. But I think the main reason he's important is because sci-fi is a nerdy genre. And John Carter is one of the first real men's men characters, not the first necessarily, but one of the first really important mainstream Han Solo type figures in what we know as like a Han Solo archetype in sci-fi. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons he's so important.
Yeah, exactly. So he's the first sword and planet hero. What I mean by sword and planet is in pulp especially, you have sword and sorcery, which is about the heroes carry swords, and it's a very pre-industrial aesthetic, and they fight evil sorcerers. Generally speaking, that's how sword and sorcery works. You've got Dungeons and Dragons, Conan the Barbarian, to a lesser extent. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien's work could be considered sword and sorcery, especially the Children of Hurin. Children of Hurin is straight up sword and sorcery. And I think I'll get to that another day when we get to talk about Robert E. Howard. Anyway, so he's the first sword and planet hero. He goes to another planet. It's science fiction, but he has a sword he fights with and a pistol. They have these radium pistols on Mars. I'm not exactly sure how they work, but Edgar Rice Burroughs described them in great detail. I lost my place. He's the first sword and planet hero, and from that comes Flash Gordon. You got Star Wars, because it's very much a space western. It's in a desert, riding horses. They've got pistols. It has kind of a western aesthetic to a lesser extent. Good guys and bad guys, white hats, black hats. But so there you have like the foundation, laying the foundation for space western, and then of course it is the foundation of space opera. What I mean by space opera is like Star Wars and to a lesser extent Star Trek are these very dramatic stories of good and evil, interpersonal conflict that are operatic in nature, and thus we can call them space opera. That's what Star Wars is, straight up space opera. So you have these like 3 or 4 different subgenres of science fiction that come out of John Carter of Mars. Without John Carter, you don't have Luke Skywalker, you don't have Han Solo, you definitely don't have Captain Kirk. I'm of the opinion that if Gene Roddenberry had just made a TV show about John Carter of Mars, William Shatner could have played the main character very well.
Funny you say that. I think that we may have had Luke Skywalker, but only because of King Arthur. You know, it's sort of the basic sure, yeah. Arthurian story of who he is. But I think that's why Lucas did what he did. It was like, what if John Carter met King Arthur?
Yeah,
like that. That's kind of what they got going there in their whole bromance or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Well, Carter is not the same as Barsoom, right?
Yeah, that's Barsoom. Yeah,
it is Barsoom.
Barsoom is what. Barsoom is the name, the Martian name for the planet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So apparently, I'm trying to find a link for this. It's not showing me, but a quick Google search claims that George Lucas openly acknowledged the influence of Burroughs' work on Star Wars.
Yeah, oh, I believe it.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I did research.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. It's not research. It is the apparently also according to this physics and astronomy group from the University of Warwick, the impact of Burroughs on science fiction was significant. It could be argued that his influence on science was at least as much so. Indeed, Burroughs' novels have been credited with two key impacts: inspiration, public support for Mars exploration, and the inspiration of individual scientists.
Wow.
Random factoid.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
Makes sense, though.
It does make sense. Like, it's the same reason some people watch Star Trek and are like, I want to invent a holograph maker thingy or a cell phone or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I mean, the whole reason we have flip phones is because of Star Trek.
Probably.
So, anyway, without John Carter, you don't have Star Trek. Period. So he was a hugely important development in science fiction genre. And also another interesting fact, in the original comic books, Superman could not fly.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
He could leap tall buildings in a single bound. That is in itself a reference to John Carter. Because
Yes, it
when
is.
John Carter goes to Mars, he can leap super high because he was raised on Earth, and in Earth's gravity, and Mars is much smaller. So he can leap much higher than the native Martians. And Siegel and Schuster took inspiration from John Carter of Mars when they were creating Superman. And not just in terms of what he can do, but also his character, because John Carter is a very morally upright character. He's very driven by chivalry and wanting to do the right thing and treating people fairly. And that's why I like the character so much, is because he treats people fair. And the other reason is that there's one scene in the first John Carter book, A Princess of Mars, where he's talking to the titular princess, Asia Thoris, and she laughs and says, "You're just like a child." And I gotta laugh because people have called me the big kid, like at church.
Oh, yeah.
Because I just, I have this childlike wonder and enthusiasm about everything. And John Carter brings that childlike enthusiasm to everything he does, even fighting and potentially dying for the people of Mars, for Deja Thoris, for freedom.
The one of the things that's interesting in regard to that, and we could definitely get into it, especially considering Brendan's dad, I posted the meme in the Brood today, but it said Rousseau, if I was in the room with Rousseau, Bin Laden, and Hitler, I'd shoot Rousseau twice, right? The concept of the noble savage was one that Edgar Rice Burroughs definitely like fully embraced in all kinds of ways. I mean, just look at Tarzan, especially, but it's also there in John Carter. As far as the noble savage goes, I think the main thing that he was trying to push, though, and why it rings true, because the noble savage idea has some patently false things about it, but the thing that really rings true is the fact that modern society is not built for man as he is. It instead seeks to shape man into some ideal of the culture, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what rings true about it, is John Carter is and Tarzan are both very, very much men as they are. And do they need character growth? Well, yeah, otherwise it wouldn't be a good story.
Yeah.
But the point is, the world seeks to shape them, and they are making choices that in their mind hopefully shape their ways more than their surroundings. And I think that's an admirable thing.
That's the thing about that I like about them, is they don't just follow the rules. They go, well, we're not going to follow the rules, we're going to do what's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing I love about Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard and other writers of that era. They weren't really concerned about the little legalities. They were concerned about what was right. And the other thing is, it's a quote from Robert E. Howard, but it typifies Edgar Rice Burroughs' attitude. Civilized men do not fear. Oh, what does it say? Civilized men can be discourteous without fearing for having their skulls split as a general thing. And I probably butchered the quote, but that's basically what it says.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he's saying that we have a very rude and discourteous society, and other more savage societies, you are not quite as discourteous, because if you're discourteous to the wrong person, well, you could probably end up dead. Am I saying that's necessarily good? No. I think that you should be able to take criticism without bringing to violence. But there's a fine line between criticism and discourtesy for just being discourteous. I mean, that's one of the things I hate about the internet. And I wrote an article about it 2 years ago, actually. And it's still my one of my most popular articles on my Substack, about how people treat each other. And when Tarzan comes into modern Western society, and this is modern Western society in, what was it, 1912 or something, he realizes that these people can be incredibly rude and cruel to each other. And he can't deal with it. He's coming in there expecting people to treat each other with basic respect, and they're not. And of course, as I've said, he was raised by apes. And the apes in Tarzan, the book, are incredibly cruel, brutal creatures. And he grows up in this environment where he's surrounded by brutality all the time, and he rebels against it and comes to Western society thinking, well, maybe they won't treat me like that here. And they treat him with a different sort of cruelty.
Right.
And he's just not expecting it. Of course, he doesn't go back to the apes. He basically decides he's going to live his own way. And
yes.
He is still Lord of the Apes. He's still a member of Parliament, but he's his own man. He doesn't have to live by the rules of British society. He doesn't have to live by the rules of the jungle. He lives by his own rules. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Oh, for sure. The biggest thing I think is actually a negative against the supposed more developed societies saying, well, there's a lot of very simple truths that you're forgetting in creating your empire, right? And it's not that your empire is necessarily bad in its initial concept, but you're forgetting some very core truths of, and he probably wouldn't say that's this way necessarily, but the way God made the world. He might say it that way, but you see my point.
Yeah.
Because they're appealing to a transcendental. They're appealing. All of his characters are appealing to a transcendental. Even though for Edgar Rice Burroughs, it was somewhat of a je ne sais quoi transcendental. And I think that we're so used to people playing the postmodern game these days that it's really refreshing, even when someone isn't logging everything in the unchanging nature of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and he's appealing to a higher form of morality, even though Burroughs was not consider himself a Christian, wasn't really even theistic in the sense that you and I are.
Right.
He was raised in a Christian home with Christian values, and he just kind of took the morality and then left the religion behind because he thought that religion was a waste of time. So,
right.
And that kind of typifies his attitude toward Western society in general. You take the good part, the morality, the moral teaching, the treat others as you want to be treated, and you leave behind all of the the fluff, the tradition, the whatever that is, in his mind, holding us back.
In a lot of ways, that was when you, and this is the thing that the slippery slope that Brendan's dad talks about all the time, the taking the Enlightenment ideas that still had the Christian values attached in a lot of cases, and over time that erodes, and we end up getting to where we're getting to. So the question ultimately is, okay, we're starting out praising all the good that these stories did. I'm not saying let's go into all the bad stuff necessarily, but there is a certain factor that, as a Christian, being able to fill in the gaps on his stories is extremely important. Otherwise, you're gonna take into account a lot of what I call cowboy culture. I think cowboy culture is one of the things that killed the church, because it basically promised masculinity that the church wasn't providing anymore. and it was all about no rules, all adventure, no strings to hold me down. And we ended up having problems because of that. But that's one of the great things about John Carter and Tarzan. They've got Jane and they got Deja Thoris. keep them grounded,
She's a civilizing influence over him. You have this classic tale of Beauty and the Beast. Now, Tarzan is not physically ugly. In fact,
right,
the book describes him as being incredibly handsome, especially to Jane. But she has this gentling influence on him. He meets Jane, and she's the most beautiful thing that he's ever seen. And he's just completely taken with her. And he stays civilized for Jane. And when actually Jane rejects his romantic advances in the first book, Tarzan goes to live in France with his friend that he rescued from the apes, and he experiences all the wonders of Paris, the Opera House, the Eiffel Tower, all that stuff. And he loves the art, he loves the opera, he reads voraciously. That's the thing about Tarzan. A lot of the movies miss this. He is an incredibly cultured man. He is a sensitive man. He's a man that loves music and art. A lot of the movies portray him as this dumb brute. Tarzan is extremely intelligent. Intelligent. There's a few, I would call them fan fictions, where Tarzan and Sherlock Holmes join forces, and I would love to read some of those. They sound like fun. But I could totally see the two of them together, because he has like the jungle smarts and the intelligence gained in living in Africa and honing his senses that we have maybe lost from being civilized for too long. And of course, Sherlock Holmes has that deductive reasoning, and together they would make a great team. But I digress. Tarzan falls into a depression after Jane rejects him, and he eventually goes back to living among the apes, because he's just so offended by how she's treated him. he never stops taking care of her. When she's in danger, he shows up and kills the leopard or whatever he has to do. So he doesn't necessarily give up on her, but her whole rejection of him caused him to basically reject society. So, and you have sort of the same thing with John Carter, is after Age of Thoris is captured, he goes on a rampage across Mars to go and rescue her. I'm digressing again. So anyway, yeah, they have this civilizing influence over the male characters, and they're the perfect balance, really. One of the modernist complaints about Tarzan and John Carter is that how say chauvinist they are, but at the time, Edgar Rice Burroughs would have been considered a feminist.
Yep.
He was quote unquote liberal in his views on women and what they were supposed to be and supposed to do. And the whole discussion in Tarzan of the Apes and John Carter of Mars is a very interesting exploration into relationships between men and women, how men relate to women. I tell people, the young men that come to me for advice and whatnot, I ask them if they read Tarzan of the Apes or John Carter of Mars. 99% of them say no. And I said, well, go read those books, and then you'll understand how men and women are supposed to relate to each other.
They do a good job. I'll give you that. The one thing is, it is an idealized picture in that, like, it's absolutely like if you're going to write the equation on paper, you're doing it as the most reduced form of the thing as possible, because there's lots of different male-female relationships that don't fall into stereotypes. But for what it is, he does an excellent job giving that one idealized view very, very clearly. I agree with you there.
Yeah. It's obviously it's not a perfect analogy for how men and women are going to relate to each other. And you have, like you say, you have a lot of variation in there.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, women are looking for men like Tarzan and John Carter of Mars, who are not just physically attractive, but are polite and gentle and stand-up guys.
They do the things.
Yeah, they do the right things and are willing to perform acts of extreme violence on their behalf.
I think.
And I'll go on, Brendan.
I think that. Well, a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to let you go because this is your shindig. We have to remember that, as idealized as these books are, because there is a certain amount. It's not just the female and the male interaction and their roles and stuff that idealized. It's also the idea that the moral law but on our hearts actually is the dominant force without society intervention. That's sort of the assumption in Tarzan, which is not accurate, obviously, but the thing that we also realize, especially with modern society, is that any society where violence is a crime, regardless of the situation, then strength is also a crime, a sin. Because if you have the capacity to do violence, one, they assume you will. but two, like it's especially on in like the internet culture, right? When you get into the real world, things get a little thing it goes off the rails. So that's why I firmly believe that the internet is not real. But what, the internet's not real life? What do you mean? But
the internet is a book
the
that
crime
we can all read.
So when strength is reviled and the capacity to do violence is reviled, and meekness, as defined as the capacity to be strong but choosing not to, is no longer a virtue.
Yes.
And
that's exactly the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, go on.
Well, which also plays into chivalry. I remember seeing a C.S. Lewis doodle on an essay. He talks about chivalry, where he points out that chivalry does two things. One, it aims a savage man. It takes someone who is drastically violent and teaches them meekness to not use the violence as their first to. And two, it teaches the coward bravery, so that the coward can stand up and learn to be violent and to be. That's the whole point of chivalry. And so when you're talking about all these things, you're saying is that Tarzan, John Carter, etc., they are chivalrous men in that they are not violent with the women, they reject them. They're gentle, kind, and intelligent, and all of that. But they also have the capacity to do extreme violence when the situation calls for it. So.
And it's interesting to note that exactly half of the Edgar Rice Burroughs fans that I personally know are women. They adore Tarzan and John Carter of Mars because that's the type of man that they find attractive. If they met somebody like that, they would marry them. And it gives us as men ideals to strive toward. I mean, obviously the ultimate ideal is Christ, but Tarzan and John Carter of Mars are like pointing toward that ideal in a way. And I almost wrote an essay. I never finished it. I started it, but I never finished it, on Tarzan of the Apes as an allegory for the gospel.
I remember you working on that one. Yeah.
It was going to be so long and complicated. There were going to be so many spoilers. I just decided I didn't finish it.
The thing that I see, particularly in John Carter, but also a little bit in Tarzan, is more of warrior Jesus really shows up in Revelation. Let's just be real, right? Like that's the most warlike our Lord gets directly, right? That and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, as far as history goes. But the the situation in regard to different types of Christ, are there other places where I don't see ways Christ is in them? One of the things that I have heard lobbed at particularly Tarzan, but a little bit more at John Carter as well, is and I think they tried to remedy it a little bit in the John Carter movie, to varying success. I like the John Carter movie, for the record, but neither of them have a lot of humor. A lot of the humor comes from outside characters. There are moments and things in the books, and admittedly, I've read more John Carter than Tarzan, but generally speaking, they are the straight character in their universe.
Yeah.
And I think Christ, on average, tends to be a bit funnier than both of them. He tends to be more sarcastic, you know. That's just one thing, for example, that I'm throwing out there.
No, I agree. We definitely run into that. I think John Carter laughs a lot in the books, but he doesn't really crack that many jokes. So he has a sense of humor. It's there, but it's like it's a little bit different. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I was just bringing it up as an example of one thing that they don't have.
Yeah, and we can get into the Rousseauian aspect a bit more because I hadn't actually put a whole lot of thought into that particular criticism of, we'll just single out Tarzan, John Carter, Mars. You don't really see it that much.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously you've thought more about it than I do, so you can go ahead and
well, I mean, yeah, go ahead, Brendan.
Well, the thing about that we gotta remember about Rousseau, actually, the thing we gotta remember about all awful thoughts generally is that usually you can find some kernel of either observed reality or a kernel of truth, as in revealed reality, in them. So Rousseau, whether or not he was realizing it, I think he was tapping into the moral law that is written in our hearts. He wrote his thing about the noble savage and all of that. Here's the problem. Sid's still a thing.
Yeah.
And he takes it way further than Paul would ever intend anyone to take it, and draws absolutely incorrect conclusions, as he's not taking the entirety of either observed reality or the gospel or revealed reality, however you want to describe it, into account, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So when Tarzan is, it is very much a Tarzan, a noble savage. So is Conan. So is maybe not Conan as much. Right? If you watch, I haven't read the book. I still need to listen to The Devil in Iron that you sent me. I know it's only 4 hours. I haven't had time. But it's not. Conan is not exactly a paragon of virtue, like Christian virtue, but he has a lot of honor in the sense of, we'll call it, right? Soldier's honor, warrior's honor, strike honor, insert gladiator here, all that stuff, right? Tarzan, you've known your description of him. Yeah, he's a savage. That he grew up amongst apes, so his natural inclination is probably more violence, even though he had the brutality, right? Compared to Western society, he is going to be more violent, right? But the book characterizes him as noble, right? You still have that noble savage, so that is a Rousseauian influence. But just because you have Rousseauian influence doesn't mean you have to go as far as Rousseau does. And really, the problem with Rousseau is what happens when you take his logic and you follow it to its completion, which is what you get in modern society, where kids are right no matter what. I'm sorry, what you say, you're a little boy. I'm sorry, I will call you he now, and we will cuff your breasts and stick a whatever on you to make you feel at home in your body. No, that is called child mutilation. That is that the child is not a noble savage. They do not know the truth, right? That's the logic of Rousseau getting run with to its nth degree. Burroughs, Howard, I don't think they run with it all the way there, but they use it as an archetype instead, where you have a character who is okay. How about this? Tarzan's Captain America.
Yeah,
Captain America, especially in the Winter you know. But more so in the comic where he gives the speech that woman at where the chick at the funeral did. He originally was Captain who made that speech. He said, when the world is standing against you and telling you you're wrong and you're right, and they tell you to move, you say no, you move. Right? It's that the moral law that's written on your heart. If the moral law says this, you need to follow it. And Tarzan, Carter, they all do that, right? So that is the archetype that they're going to. That just happens to be wrapped in this Rousseauian veneer. And Rousseau does a lot more than this. But anyway, that's my observation as far as Rousseau's concerned.
Okay.
I'm Joshua.
That's good. I hadn't even thought of that, so go on.
No, I agree. The to go to church history, the other half of this is what they call total depravity, not utter depravity, but total depravity. There is not one part of our existence that is not touched by sin, and therefore there can't be a noble savage. That's really what it comes down to. And there were Calvinists, and there are Calvinists who take it in ridiculous directions and take it to the whole other degree, and we don't ever think about the law of God written on the heart of man. I'm 100% with Brendan on that. The those are really the two sides, and they're both true, and we have to hold them in tension, or else we start going down all kinds of weird and crazy paths. And that's why cowboy culture, as I coined it, really thrived, because quite frankly, the church was dour, the church was Calvinistic, and the church was, which really is a contradiction in terms when you take Calvin and the Puritans at face value. But the whole church was basically made for dour women who were trying to shape and reform society, and therefore men wanted to get out in the real world, in the woods and the creeks and the trees and the horses and the shooting and adventure. So there's great stories that come out of that, like the ones we talked about today, but it has to be held in tension with the fact that there's so much more that God wants for us, even besides adventure. There's mundanity too. Brendan's working on an essay kind of about some of that and being a side character, and I'm excited to hear more about that in the future.
Yeah, I am too. So I just want to touch on Conan real quick, and I do want to do an episode on Robert E. Howard at some point in the future.
When your turn comes back around, we'll roll right into Robert E. Howard. That sounds great.
So Conan is not a moral man by the highest biblical standards. Absolutely not. But in his society, he is the most moral man.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're talking about the world of Babylon, where they're sacrificing infants by the thousands to placate evil horned gods that live in hell and long for blood. We're talking about that kind of world. And Conan is a guy that stands up and says, no, I'm not going to treat people that way. I'm going to treat them differently. And that's why people in his society hate him so much, is because he holds a mirror to them and says, hey, you guys are not doing things right. I'm going to put this right. And a lot of times he puts it right with extreme acts of violence. Like I said, he is a corrupted hero by every standard imaginable. He's the most morally upright person in society, and that's what he's trying to get at. And I'll get into that in more detail when we discuss Robert E. Howard. But Tarzan stands up once again as a paragon of morality in a society that's become decadent and lazy and corrupt and to a certain extent evil. And he stands up to that evil and says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play by your rules. I'm going to play by my own rules. And that's that cowboy mentality that Josh was talking about. And a lot of the reason that men started leaving the church in the 20th century is because the church was just saying, "Oh, don't smoke, don't drink, and don't fool around and respect your elders and don't ask any questions."
Yep.
And they didn't want to reconcile the wildness that is inherent in the male of the species. We're men. We like to do mannish things. We like to go out and go hunting or play sports or do something physical. And sometimes we do things that are violent. And sometimes those are bad. And sometimes those are in the interest of justice. And you can't curb that and call it morality. You just can't do that. Because God asked his prophets, mind you, to do things that were incredibly violent. I mean, Elijah spent he spent all day killing prophets of Baal to the point where his sword cleaved to his hand. His hand was forced into a fist because he had been holding his sword for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And by all modern standards, that was incredibly evil. But what we don't realize is that the prophets of Baal were far, far worse than we are even told in Scripture. I mean, we don't even know what they were doing. And I think that's a mercy that we don't know. But they were bad enough that God wanted them gone.
Yep. Well, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap this one, if you guys are good on that. And we can hang for a few if you want to go whichever way. Are you guys good with that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, everybody, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. We'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War.
For more episodes of Poets at War, please visit joshuadavidling.com or check us out on YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere you get your podcast transmissions. This is Sergeant Ollie, signing out.
God of songs, said the warrior bard, who all the world betray thee. One sword at least thy right shall guard, one